Hey folks, and welcome to the first official inaugural edition, episode, video of The Elder Nerd. I have another YouTube channel called The Nutty Knife Guy, and I will link this one time and one time only for anybody who happens to be a nerd and a knife guy, or a knife person, to that channel. But I have one short video up. I just wanted to test the channel when I first created it to make sure everything was working and hunky dory and all that other stuff, and it was. So this is it. What is the Elder Nerd channel going to be about? Well, nerdy stuff. I'm old. I'm 54 years old. I'm not really old, but I'm old, and I've been a nerd for pretty much my entire life. I've worked in law enforcement. I've studied political science in college, but math kept me from getting a degree so far. I'm going to go back. I'm going to get the degree one way or the other, eventually, before I die. But I'm not a math nerd. I'm just a nerd, and I probably have something called dyscalculia looking back on it, because my problem with math goes way beyond a distaste for it. But anyway, about nerdy stuff. Now, full disclaimer, I am not a fan of most of the modern sci-fi and fantasy stuff that's being put out today. And I'm going to be doing a lot of complaining about such things. But I'm going to be explaining why I don't like it. And this channel is going to get a tad political. And the reason for that is that science fiction, at least what I consider to be good science fiction, is social commentary. And social commentary kind of means political commentary. My politics, I would call myself a right-leaning libertarian. So that's where it's going to be colored. My favorite sci-fi author of all time is Robert Heinlein. That should give, well, some of you older folks that have actually read good science fiction, that should kind of tell you where I am. I'm a history nerd. I'm a political science nerd. I'm a knife nerd. I'm a lot of different kinds of nerds, right? I used to play all kinds of tabletop role-playing games. I haven't done that in years now. But when I did play D&D, I pretty much refused to play anything but first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I stand by that. So that's where this is. Now, the reason that I'm not a fan, and I'm just kick this off and put it where excuse me, I'm so eloquent. I belong on YouTube. The reason that this is just kind of get you an idea where this channel is going to be. I'm going to tell you why I think modern sci-fi, by and large, sucks. And I had another channel years ago that didn't go anywhere called The Fighting Nerd, where I combined my passion with for knives, sharp pointy things, and other implements of destruction, and the nerdy stuff, and that didn't go very well. The knife channel, the Nutty Knife Guy, is doing quite well, so I'm hoping that separating the two, I can do the nerdy stuff and meet with some success. And the reason I'm thinking that modern sci-fi sucks is because even though it should be social commentary, sci-fi should be social commentary, we're not getting social commentary. Now we get social activism, either to the left or to the right, mostly to the left these days, but to the right too. And it's activism, it's not commentary. This is how it should. This is how you should be thinking, and if you're not thinking, you're wrong. And not only are you wrong, but you're evil and wrong, is the way a lot of it goes. Or you're stupid, or you're just stupid and wrong, and your viewpoint isn't worth considering. It didn't always used to be that way. Even Heinlein, who I would say was a libertarian before anybody coined that term, even though I think his politics were slightly to the right, like mine, his work was more about societal evolution because of a given technology or in spite of a given technology in some way. And he would take you one way or the other, left or right, right, and let you get a perspective on what it would be like to be under, like in Starship Troopers, a highly militarized society where only military people could actually hold political office, or to something like The Moon as a Harsh Mistress, but gives you kind of an anti-colonial perspective. His work would do both. You don't get that anymore. And also I should mention that a lot of what people consider science fiction today isn't. There's been an unfortunate blending of fantasy and sci-fi genres, and I will say this about Star Wars. Now, before Disney and Kennedy got a hold of Star Wars, and that's a whole different video, I was a big Star Wars fan. I remember in 1977, when I was a little kid, because I was born in '68, folks, I was up watching, I was already a nerd at that age, so I was up late watching Rod Taylor in The Time Machine, the good version of The Time Machine, the only decent version of The Time Machine that's ever been filmed, from 1966, I believe. And I saw the commercial for Star Wars with that TIE fighter getting blown out of the sky. I woke up the house. I went nuts. Got to see this. I woke up my brother, who was a sci-fi guy. I said, boy, did you see this thing, this movie called Star Wars? You got to take me to see that. You got to. And you got to understand, this was in '77, and we were living kind of out in the country. We had an antenna on top of the house, and we got 3 stations on a good day, right? And we lived far enough away. When we went to the theater, it was not a weekly occurrence. It was rare that I went to see a movie in a theater. Okay, but I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I was going to be an absolute terror until I got to see this movie. And I actually made him take me to see that twice in the theater, which was huge back then for our family. And on the way back, home from the theater that first time and the second time, I was in the back just making all kinds of my own sound effects, playing, reenacting the attack on the Death Star. Okay, so I'm a Star Wars fan when Star Wars was still Star Wars. But that was never really, looking back on it, it's not science fiction, that's science fantasy, because they tried to make a scientific attempt to explain the Force and everything like that, and that's when they started doing that with the midichlorians and all that stuff. In my opinion, that's when they kind of ruined Star Wars, because it worked as a sci-fi as a space fantasy. It worked that way. You didn't have to explain everything. But I'm not saying I'm knocking Star Wars, but I'm saying that that's what began this mixing of sci-fi and fantasy that kind of diluted both, in my opinion. But science fiction will go to the original Star Trek and even the Next Generation. And although I used to watch the Next Generation a lot, I don't watch that. I still watch the old show reruns, the original series reruns. But I don't watch Next Gen reruns. They're just not watchable for me. But they were a social commentary that wasn't too heavy-handed. They got a little preachy on occasion, but not huge. Right? But now with Discovery, and yes, I actually forced myself to watch the first season of Discovery. And I suffered through the first episode of Picard and couldn't do it. Now, because of this channel, I might have to force myself to watch more of the new stuff. I really don't want to. But the channel really wouldn't be worth much if I don't. So I'm going to take a hit for my own team. Me, I suppose, for that. But I think what I want to hit on today is the strong female character. Largely because Nichelle Nichols recently passed away. But also, and it's not just a strong female character, but what they call inclusivity altogether. Because modern science fiction, because now they're jamming it down your throats and they're being activists instead of commentators. they seem to think that there's something new in science fiction. That they have a monopoly. Well, no, not a monopoly, but they seem to think that having a black woman command a starship, or a woman command a starship, or a black person in authority, in a position of authority, or a black man in a position of authority. Anyway, they seem to think that this inclusivity is new, and that the strong female character is something new. And if you look at sci-fi, at the history of sci-fi, I'm going to make a slight adjustment here because I'm afraid my camera's going to fall off. If you look at sci-fi, though, sci-fi has never been inclusive. And as I got older, and I'm talking about high school here, and they started talking about, well, it was before high school, but when I really started noticing about affirmative action and things like that, and how they were wanting more female characters in this show and that show, or black characters or whatever. I was kind of puzzled because pretty much all I watched when I was a kid was science fiction, and I read comic books. I was a huge comic book fan before, in the 80s, the comic book industry took a nosedive too. But I was raised with, I grew up watching Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. And until I got older and they started talking about, Nichelle Nichols' contribution to civil rights and things like that, I never thought about it. She was Lieutenant Uhura. She wasn't the black lieutenant. She wasn't the black character. She was Lieutenant Uhura. She was accepted. She was respected. She was liked. She was good at her job. And that was no big deal to me. Fine, cool. And it's the same thing. Well, there was an Asian character, and there was a Russian character. There was a Vulcan. To me, it was all the same thing. They were just there. They were the Enterprise crew. They were my friends. That I grew up with. And also, when it comes to strong female characters, which I'm going to try and maintain focus on here, the original Battlestar Galactica, you had Sheba, who was a fighter pilot. Not only a fighter pilot, among the best. As good as Apollo, maybe even as good as Starbuck. They kind of hinted at that. Again, she was accepted. She flew Vipers. She was put on mission. She could be counted on to get the job done, and she happened to be a woman. Athena, the same thing. Started off as a technician, good at her job, right? And flew Vipers. At Cassiopeia, showed a lot of courage as a medical technician. But the thing is this: those shows did not beat you to death with the idea. You didn't see Captain Kirk. Well, hey, Captain Kirk, this is Lieutenant Uhura, and she's black. They don't quite do that these days with what's her name, Michael Burnham, or any of the other black characters on there. They don't quite do that these days, but boy, they want to. You can tell. And I know this is going to make a lot of people mad. And also, I think as Discovery grows, I think that Michael Burnham is actually not bad as a character, and the actor's performance is not bad. It's the stories that are bad, and this constant browbeat of the message that goes on there. And it was even worse with Picard. The first episode of Picard, I couldn't stand. I almost didn't make it through that. It took some summoning of internal fortitude to get through the first episode of Discovery. I mean, the first season of Discovery. I actually stopped at 4 episodes and decided I wasn't going to watch it. And then I said, well, I'll give it a chance. And then I went back and watched the rest of the season. But anyway, Lieutenant Uhura, without a doubt, strong. She even, kicked a little butt in Mirror Mirror. Always courageous. never lost her head, but was still feminine. And the same thing with Athena and Sheba on Battlestar Galactica. I'm going back to Star Trek. I don't see how you could say that Nurse Chapel was not a strong female character. Oh yeah, she may not have did any fighting or anything like that, but she was steadfast. She was stout, and she didn't take anybody's crap. But at the same time, she didn't lose her femininity, and that's what drives me crazy about the strong female character, as it is defined today. Their idea of a strong female character is a woman who acts like a man. I give you Sarah Connor in the last Terminator movie, which was another one which was hard for me to get through, but I did. They turned her into a man. Yeah, she was a strong female character because she acted like a man. Now, she got a little bit butch and started fighting, and started fighting in the second Terminator movie. That is true. But she never stopped being a mother. She was always focused on her son. She didn't really lose her femininity as much as she had to kind of force her way past it to do what had to be done for her son. She kind of started down that road. I'll give them that. I'll say that. But they didn't lose their femininity. And you go back to a lot of the 50s shows, 50 sci-fi movies. You know, the infamous Giant Claw, which probably the worst monster effects in the history of history. You had a woman mathematician, which in the 50s, that was not a popular idea for a woman to have a professional position like that, a responsibility like that. Matter of fact, you had a lot of female scientists. One in This Island Earth. Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. There was a strong female lead in the original Thing from Another World. What I'm saying here is that there were women in science fiction. Women were included everywhere all the time, and it never dawned, because that's pretty much all I watched. I was a little shaken when people started talking about, well, you have to have strong female character here, strong female characters here, and even Charlie's Angels, as much cheesecake as that show was, a lot of people, a show about female leads, being detectives, that was like novel. But to a lot of people, but for me, well, if they can be a Starfleet officer, or an entomologist fighting giant ants like the female lead in them. It never fazed me that way, and it's still a little. I still think it's a little bit funny when, well, Michael Burnham, female in charge of the starship, and granted she didn't start that way, but she was the main character, right? Well, Catherine Janeway, as recently as Voyager, and that's recently to me. I know that a lot of you younger people, it's ancient history. When it comes to a person of color in charge of a starship, as a main character in charge of a starship, wasn't a starship until later on. Deep Space Nine, Benjamin Sisko, Avery Brooks was brilliant. I liked that show much better than I liked Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. And not only did he command Deep Space Nine, but he wound up commanding a starship too, the Defiant. But again, they didn't jam that kind of thing down your throat. This is Captain Sisko. Well, at the time, Commander Sisko. This is Commander Sisko. He's commanding officer of Deep Space Nine. Starfleet officer. Good at what he does. I don't think anybody that watched Star Trek or was a sci-fi guy batted an eyelash at that. It's no problem. As a matter of fact, I was pumped when I heard that Avery Brooks was going to be in it, because I was a fan of the Spencer for Hire, and he did great as Hawk in that show. Voyager, not as good as Deep Space Nine, but it was watchable, and Janeway was done very organically as a female captain and everything like that. But the thing of it is, not only but she was a strong female character, no doubt. She could be tough when she wanted to be. But there was also a maternal side to her, and the longer that show went on, and she was she was isolated with that crew, the more that maternal instinct came out. I think. I don't know if it was intentional on Kate Mulgrew's part playing the character or the writers, but there was definitely a maternal feeling toward the younger crew members, and that did not diminish her in any way. But now you have like movies. Just comes to mind, the Atomic Blonde, where you got a woman that's 98 pounds soaking wet, kicking the crap out of 300-pound muscle men. Not just one, but two or three at a time. And and that's not the only one. The old show Alias with Jennifer Gardner, which I rather enjoyed, I got to admit. But yeah, and they don't want to be they're not strong female characters. They're female characters acting like men. And I know well, we identify as that, and we identify as this, and there's toxic masculinity, horsepucky. There is nothing wrong with being female. There is nothing wrong with acting feminine. There is nothing wrong with a woman knowing how to fight. Matter of fact, women should know how to fight and use weapons and everything like that. But that doesn't mean that they have to act like men. Why would they want to act like most men anyway? Why would anyone act like So yeah, but that's going to be the first one, and this is probably, like I said, it's probably going to make people mad. But what can you do? There's nothing I can do about that. Now, so, and I'm primarily focusing on the strong female characters, but all of the sexual preferences and the race and everything like that. The thing of it is, for the for science fiction people that were raised on that sci-fi, I guess it was something that I accepted before I realized that no one else, that other people weren't accepting it. And I guess now what we're seeing now is just an overcompensation, because I think most people have accepted women in what were once traditionally male roles. I think for the most part, race is, at the very least, far less of an issue than it used to be, unless the people of those races or sexual preferences or whatever make it an issue by becoming militant about it. Oh boy, am I going to get in trouble for this. I wonder if you two will give me a strike on my very first video for this channel. Anyway, but that's basically it. I just wanted to think about these female characters and why, and that's my biggest thing. Why do what is called a strong female character have to act like men to be strong female characters? Didn't used to be that way, and I don't really think it is now, but that's what they're portraying. And I think a lot of it has to do with lazy writing, and I went into a whole bunch on lazy writing in another video. But instead of actually trying to make a strong female character female, the lazy approach is to write a female character like it's a male. Like that character is male. Now, I come from a perspective, I am a published author from a small publishing company. I'll talk about that later in some shameless self-promotion. But writing is also very lazy. That's a whole other story. But that's again a whole other video. But because of that lazy writing, and I think that's not necessarily. Sometimes a lot of these writers that are doing this aren't doing this on purpose to prove an agenda. They're just lazy. Okay, I'm just going to use a personal example. My mother. I have 3 brothers. My dad died when I was 3 years old, and my mother raised 4 boys by herself, with some, well, not by herself, with some help from her parents. She worked as a registered nurse, and worked herself to the bone to provide for her kids. And we moved around a lot because she would follow the money. If she saw somebody, a nurse's position that paid more, so she could provide for her sons better, we went. Okay. But she was a nurse, and she was loved by the people that she cared for. I remember once when I was very little, she hadn't had a day off in 3 weeks, and we were going to do family stuff. Like 3 o'clock on that day off, what would have been her day off, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, they called her. One of her patients at the nursing home she was working at that time was having some sort of crisis, and only my mom could solve it. They called her Miss Alice, and only my mom could solve it. And they called her. No time off in 3 weeks. She gets dressed and she drives 20 miles to this nursing home to take care of this patient, and she didn't get paid for it. They didn't put her on the clock. Right? And she raised 4 boys with just a little help from her parents. Right? And was active in the community. Right? But I defy anyone to say that she wasn't a strong woman. She had to be, for what my brothers and I put her through, she was Herculean. But she didn't act like a man. So, if I have offended you, I really don't care. If you are offended, then at least if you are offended, then that's on you, quite frankly. This channel will probably, if this channel it gets enough of a response that I continue doing it, it's going to offend a lot of people. So there it is. I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about next week. Probably the lazy writing thing, because that bugs me. But we shall see. Anyway, this is the Elder Nerd, also known as the Nutty Knife Guy, but right now I'm the Elder Nerd, and I bid you goodbye.